Chapter 15. Anne was not getting any rest, not even sleeping in the cottage. The week after the sleeping pill incident, it was bad enough that Sharon commented on it. It was then that Anne decided something must be done. The brownie had been giving her hot toddies nightly, but they weren't doing anything more than helping her fall asleep. That wasn't her problem anymore. It was staying asleep or avoiding the dreams. Finally, Wednesday night after the family had gone to bed, she stepped out into the night, locking the door with the magical key and turning on the alarms. The last time they had gone to Skye's for her and Elizabeth's lessons, Sean had given her what he called a remote. Said if the perimeter was breached, it would go off no matter where she was. She slipped this into her pocket with the key and traced her steps down the block to Quartz. It was hard not to think of Johnny on the walk. The only time she had traversed this path had been with him, and every step reminded her of that. She chastised herself for pining after a man like a lovesick maid, and forced herself to concentrate on the walk and avoiding the dangerous street. At that corner she paused, hearing both people and cars nearby, and finally broke down and asked someone to help her with the street. They were kind enough to show her the crosswalk sign button and how to listen for it. Anne thanked them and crossed the street on her own with a small amount of pride. She found Quartz the same way, by sound. Anne entered the first room and stepped out of the way, trying to get a feel for the chamber. There was music playing, though not nearly as loud as the last time she had been there. There was the sound of billiards and the distinct thunk of darts into corkboard. She remembered the path the waiter had guided her through and attempted it slowly, finding only the occasional obstacle of people in the way. When she found the door and entered the main room, she was surprised to find it almost quiet, save for the people. There was the sound of dining and drinking, some softer music, and that painful squeal of the microphone as someone fumbled with it, rustling papers. Anne tread slowly to where she remembered the bar being, following the sound of foamy liquids pouring into pints. She felt for an empty space and stood there, waiting for the ghost girl down the way to notice her. Tori came over with a smile. "What can I do for you, miss?" she said with genuine cheer in her voice. "Well, I think I would like a table, but I despair of finding one on my own." She grinned. "Oh, I think we can accommodate you." She turned and yelled down at the other bartender, "Brad! I'm going out on the floor for a bit!" Brad grumbled, but apparently either nodded or really had no say in the matter. Tori lifted the end of the bar up and stepped out, taking Anne's arm. She led her to the aisle that ran between the tables and the bar and looked over the crowd. "Okay, I've got the perfect table for you. If you decide to come back more regularly, then you should be able to remember this path." She began to lead her 5 strides to the right, parallel to the bar, then made a left. "You'll always want to keep your right hand out to the side like this," she added, holding Anne's arm out beside her, in front of Tori's own body with the palm facing the stage. She set a hand back at her elbow. "The dance floor is on your right, and this will keep people from backing into you as much. Then you can use your tap stick in the left to make sure that no ass has left a chair out." She counted out another 6 strides before turning left again and settling on at an empty table at the front of the dance floor. "It's kind of empty on Wednesdays, not so much with the dancing, but open mic is popular with the poets. Some of the local musicians will occasionally try out new pieces, too. We even had a dancer once." She set a menu that Anne could plainly see in front of her and smiled. "Liberty has assured me you can see this," she said quietly, "though you might want to braille read it for appearances. Our menu changes too much to be able to actually print one up for you. So, can I get you a drink while you decide?" She smiled up at Tori. "You're a right dear, you know that. I would like some tea, but I need—" She could feel her face flush with embarrassment. "I'm having trouble sleeping, and Mother always recommended—" Tori laughed softly. "Nightcaps. Mine always went for the brandy. Swore by it for teething. I've got something that might do. How much you want? A bottle?" She sighed. "Slip a healthy bit in my tea, please, and be discreet. 'Tis embarrassing enough, my need." Tori gave her shoulder a pat and headed back to the bar. Anne ran her fingers over the slick paper of the menu, her eyes following her fingertips, though her head was up enough to make it appear she was facing the stage. She had learned to take advantage of the inability of people to tell where she was looking. She saw Scotch eggs near the bottom and immediately closed the menu. Sharon's meal tonight had been wholly unappetizing, and so unfamiliar her stomach had complained. She had not eaten a lot. She had discovered that Wednesday and Friday nights were the nights Sharon had designated health food nights, and cooked things with a meat that wasn't from any animal. She had no idea what a tofurkey was, but it was certainly not foul. She was beginning to tune in the poet on the stage when Tori returned with a tea tray. She set it down in the center of the table and verbally guided Ann's hand to it, telling her where and what everything was. "Full teapot here at 12 o'clock. Your cup at 2, she said, directing Ann's fingertips to the delicate overturned cup. "Sugar bowl and tongs. A few biscuits," she grinned, using the British term for cookie. "Fresh from Lafayette. And the milk," she added, setting a spouted cream server, which was not cold enough to protect milk, in Ann's hand. "I'd go easy on the milk." There was something in Tori's eye that warned her it wasn't remotely dairy. Ann smiled, blessing the woman for her discretion. "Have you decided on anything to eat?" "Aside from the fact that I believe that I'll be dining here or at home on Wednesdays and Fridays," she sighed. I'd like a plate of Scotch eggs and a conversation with Roulette if she's here." Tori laughed, taking the menu. "She's a depravity tonight, working with her sister. She'll be here this weekend, most certainly, though. Would you like to talk to Liberty, maybe?" "That would be nice, thank you." Tori left her, and Ann prepared herself a cup of tea, taking a discreet whiff of the milk and discovering the potent perfume of alcohol. She added it to the tea and tried her best not to make a face as she sipped. One of the biscuits helped to cut the bite. They were drizzled with the chocolate Elizabeth had introduced her to, and she found it a nice balance between the flavors. The current poet left the stage to a smattering of applause. When the next person took his place, the audience began to clap louder in anticipation. There came the sound of guitar strings, and Ann looked up in curiosity, felt her heart stop to see Johnny sitting there, tuning the strings on the instrument resting on his thigh. His hair fell across his face as he worked, though it did not fall from his shoulder. He tossed it back and began to sing. The melody was passing familiar, though the words were new, and Ann quickly gathered that this was the song she had been told to request of him months ago, and never got around to. From beneath the cloudy sky, I heard a young girl calling. Bonnie Jack, they've taken you away. You stole the giant's harp and gold like a hero young and bold, and he's taken you a changeling for to stay. High rise the fields above the sky, where fear of falling teaches us to fly. He tried to bring you down, that damn giant with his crown, but you leapt from the clouds for to be free. From above a cloudy sky, I heard a young man calling. Jenny, all I did for thee. I stole the giant's golden crown for to save old London town. Now you must go back to Arthur without me. From beneath a cloudy sky, I heard a young girl calling. Bonnie Jack, I'd die to set you free. For though Arthur is my love, still I swear to God above, 'tis dear indeed your friendship is to me. High rise the field above the sky, where fear of falling teaches us to fly. He tried to bring you down, that damn giant with his crown, but you leapt from the clouds for to be free. From above a cloudy sky, I heard a young man crying, Jenny, you must never die for me. By your honor I implore, for the kingdom needs you more. You must hie back to Arthur without me. From beneath the cloudy sky, I heard a young maid crying, Bonnie Jack, you break my heart in two. It's an awful choice you bring twixt my lover and my king, but I'll go back to Arthur without you. High rise the fields above the sky, where fear of falling teaches us to fly. He tried to bring you down, that damned giant with his crown, but you leapt from the clouds for to be free. When he was done, his eyes cast over the audience as he bowed, caught Anne's, and gave her his sad smile. It wasn't until he left the stage and Anne raised her tea back to her lips that she realized her eggs had come and she was no longer alone at the table. Liberty was watching her with a nearly hidden look of amusement. When Anne began. Second verse? Liberty set her hand on hers as Anne blushed. It happens around him. See? She pointed out the small cluster of fangirls swarming him near the end of the bar. Anne's cheeks darkened even further. That does not help. You wanted to see me? She asked. Aye, she said, setting down her cup and cutting into a crusted, sausage-wrapped boiled egg. She was grateful for the change of subject. I've been thinking about coming more often. Well, I need a few hours away and I don't always want to eat at home, alone. This, she gestured to the room, sounds like the table I'm used to. I'm alone but in company. Mrs. Tallis cooking not to your liking? Anne groaned. She's on a tear about healthier eating. I understand about no meat on Fridays, but she's trading it for somewhat, I don't know what it is, but 'tis awful. She took a bite of her egg and sighed with contentment. 'Tis been more than a century since I've had one of these. Anyway, I was wondering, since that street yon is a bit rough, might I link my door to one of the ones upstairs? There was a brief moment of chill heralding his approach. Then Johnny was standing there with a bottle in hand. Looking to avoid my walking you home again? He commented dryly. Anne was beginning to think her cheeks would never return to their normal colour. 'Tis not that. Once in a bit would be nice. Just several reasons. Would you like a seat? Some tea, perhaps? He pulled out a chair and sat, shook his head about the tea. Mayhap later. She continued her reasoning. One, coming here is dangerous and more than just that street. There's the risk of someone seeing me leave the house. Johnny nodded. Good point. Two, I've begun taking Elizabeth to lessons with Sean every Tuesday and Thursday, and if her mother comes home before we get back, I can just take us here and walk home. There's a park nearby I take her to, and there is plenty here by way of excuse without having to explain to her mother the lessons. Lessons which she'll eventually want to see demonstrations of, which is the only reason I haven't told her. She took a breath. I hate keeping it from her, but it's for the best. And she has granted me a great deal of autonomy with her daughter over the last month. I think she likes the improvements, now that she's not getting in trouble at school for things not her fault. Well, they were, but not under her control. She slowly ate her egg and drank her tea. I don't see a problem with it at all, Liberty said. I'd recommend the third door, though. That's roulettes. Occasionally there are small gatherings up there, private parties, and that door is far enough back they'll not see something odd when the door opens from your cottage, and not a bedroom. Anne nodded. Wise, thank you. That, and if Elizabeth has to escape and no one's home. Liberty gave her hand a squeeze, rose. I'll leave you to be. I've got summat to deal with, she said, eyeing something happening at the bar. Oh, and Anne, if you can think of it, you can order it. Lafayette's good that way. If it'll take more than an hour to cook, just call ahead. She rose, paused behind Johnny's chair with a hand on his shoulder, her voice lowered. Stay with her. If anything happens, keep her calm and everything should be fine. Aye. He glanced over at the bar, eyes following Liberty as she slipped through the crowd. What is going on? Anne asked calmly as she cut up the second egg and fixed herself another cup of tea. Mundane trouble. Just a pair of cops, not a full raid. He drank his beer and changed seats, taking the one Liberty had vacated so he could watch the goings-on. Raid? Like a cattle raid? He chuckled at that. No. It's what they call it when the police come into a place and start looking for illegal things, like drugs or people too young to be drinking, etc. There's only two, so likely it's not one. They're probably checking on a complaint. If they find anything, more will come, and we will leave discreetly. She nodded, unable to keep from worrying. She sipped more of her tea. She found herself wanting to ask if she could get the bottle of milk to go home. This stuff was potent. Perhaps she should just ask her brownie. She fidgeted with her biscuit, sipping occasionally of her tea, neither of them really saying anything, and that was perfectly fine with her. Sitting in silence was kind of nice, too. At least this kind of silence. They listened to other poets read their work, and two other singers, one with a song of their own crafting and moderately good. Johnny excused himself for a moment after the performance and drew the artists aside, offering them some advice which Anne assumed they took well by Johnny's attitude. He did not sit down when he returned, but reached out and took up her hand, pulling her to her feet. "It is time to go." Something in his voice said that it was not wise to debate the matter. She reached down for Capine. "I have to pay my tab," she insisted, pulling the plastic card from her pocket that Liberty had shown her how to use. He slipped it back into her pocket, pulled her close, and smiled. "If Liberty will even take your money, you can give it to her tomorrow. I promised I'd keep you safe, and 'tis now time to leave." His voice was a near purr, so soft that, if it had not been meant for her, she would not have heard it. It sent a chill down her spine for multiple reasons. "Fine," she gasped, swaying a bit from both the alcohol and his nearness. She let him put his arm around her waist, pulling her close as they meandered out the door like a pair of lovers. Once, out in the cool night air, they began to walk down the pavement with her still wrapped in his arms. They had not gotten as far as the next storefront when several cops pulled up to the curb and got out, heading into the club. Johnny stopped, turning back to look like everyone else, drawing Anne back against the building and out of the way. Once the gawkers began to move on, he loosened his grasp on her and turned to walk her home. He saw her to the door, watching her with concern. "I'm certain you can go to Kurt's tomorrow and fix the door. 'Tis a good idea." "What time do they open?" "I'm sure if you call, they will be open when you get there. Miss O'Keefe and Roulette both have taken a shine to you." There was a sparkle in his eyes when he said it, and Anne got the feeling there was more to the statement than the words. "Thank you for walking me home and avoiding that. He smiled, bending over her hand. "My pleasure, Keo Brannock. Call Roulette. Liberty may be busy in the morn." She blushed as his lips touched her skin. I can wait. A few days more will make no difference." "Do not wait too long." He smiled and stepped back, watching her get out her magic key and open the door, going inside. Once the door closed, he shifted and flew away. Anne slipped upstairs on silent feet, paused to check in on Elizabeth, saw her sleeping soundly and headed to her own room. Her own bed was neatly made. She never slept there any more. The room was dead to her. She went to her closet and opened the door to the cottage. The fire was not even on in the front room, though the bedroom door stood open, waiting for her, and she could see the fire gleaming from in there. Silently grateful, she let Capine go to her corner and sat to draw off her boots, setting them beside the bench, and drifted to her room. Her gown was laying out on the bed as usual, and the fire blazing away at just the right level to keep out the increasing chill of the night. On the nightstand was another toddy, but somehow she did not think it was enough any more. She sighed. "'Tis not that I'm ungrateful, but I don't think this will do tonight. Have we anything stronger?" She felt the question between her toes and sighed. "The strongest can be found. I need sleep beyond dreams." The house warned her to be careful as she slipped into the bathroom to attend to her needs. She took a little longer than necessary before coming out and slipping into her gown. She tucked herself up into the bed before she turned to the small tumbler resting beside the lit lamp. She smiled, took a sip of the incredibly potent liquor. She could taste the honey that had been swirled in to kill the bitter, dry alcohol taste. She felt the languor creeping into her limbs immediately and sank back against the pillows. Her last thought before she slept was that she needed to be up and to the other house by 8. Anne found the poteen to work to a small extent. The liquor tasted like rubbing alcohol smelled, but the honey stirred into it helped. Anne rose and headed back to the Tallows to get Elizabeth off to school. Over the last month, Sharon had begun leaving earlier for work, since she did not have to stay to get Elizabeth off to school in the mornings, staying only long enough to kiss her tow-headed curls as the girl ate her breakfast. Once the school bus had left, Anne locked up and walked to Quartz. Whatever had gone down the night before had been over by morning. Liberty took Anne to lunch when she arrived to enchant the door and explained over Chinese food. Apparently someone called in a complaint that they saw Brad selling coke from the bar. Anne frowned, gestured to the glass she only knew Liberty had because of how she held her hand. You mean what you ordered to drink? Liberty laughed. No, that's Coca-Cola, a legal drink. Coke, for short. They were talking about cocaine, a potent and highly illegal drug. Also Coke, for short. Same root word, same nickname. Anywho, they came to check it out and found a box behind the bar he was supposedly distributing out of. I made them run fingerprints. The box was half empty and there were no prints on it at all. Therefore, it was planted. And there were no evidence of the little baggies they were packaged in anywhere in the club, so they were looking into who'd want to frame us. Daw's looking too, and we'll likely find them first. He's some ideas. Anne nodded. I was hoping it was nothing. Dukes and Torres, the cops what came last night, are good people. But they've got their jobs to do. They're actually relieved when things fail to add up. I think they'll be looking for the culprit just because they don't like being used to hurt the innocent. Or made to look foolish, Anne added. Liberty shook her head. That I don't think has a lot to do with it. Maybe for Dukes, but not Torres. Anywho, glad you plan to come regular. You should read or sing one night, not just eat and run. Anne did think about it and decided against it. Then one night when she entered the cottage about a week later, she found a large envelope on the table addressed to her. She went to it, curious. Mail for me? The papers inside had been handwritten in glamoured ink so she could read them. It was sheet music. She laid them out on the table, sorting the different songs together, and smiled. I think he's trying to tell me something. Trouble is, I don't read music. She was reading through a page of one song when she heard music coming from the pantry. She rose, opening the door, and saw a place where nothing was, essentially a hole in the shelf. She closed her hand over the object and felt the music between her fingers. She carried it back to the table. Sounds coming from the device matched the lyrics, at least. There were modern songs and some of a folkish bent. Most were not Irish at all. She spoke to the device, asking it to play one of the other songs on the table, and it immediately obliged. She smiled. Her reading music problem was solved. Now she just had to get up the courage to get on the stage. It was just over a week after she had received the music that Johnny approached her at karaoke. She had come early that Friday, not even pretending to stay for supper, and ordered real food. She found the concept of karaoke very curious. The folk who got up to sing ranged from excellent to outright caterwauling. What interested her was that most seemed to feel little embarrassment at how badly they had done. Anne was just finishing her dinner when Johnny appeared at her elbow, his hand out. Come, sing with me, Kilbrannock, he said in his soft voice. She started to refuse, then realized that she had best get in practice. The next funeral she would likely be asked again, and far better to be horrible among strangers. Which, is it one I know? He gave her a tip of the head that was as close to a shrug as he ever came. I sent you the piece. Your part's easy. Mine may come across somewhat hard for you, but there's meaning here, I'd have said. She reached up and set her small, warm hand into his slim, cool one, and he noted the purple, iridescent paint on her nails and smiled at her. Indulging in a wee bit of modern vanity, mistress? He teased. An interesting choice of colour. Anne blushed and tried to reclaim her hand, but he used it to draw her to her feet instead. Elizabeth wanted practice, and this week 'twas the only way I could get her to sit still long enough to take in the Lewis and Clark expedition. I was going to remove it, but I smelled supper and felt the need to escape. 'Tisn't bad, though I'd ask her for somewhat more pale. He drew her along to the stage, expertly dodging patrons. Do you remember Love the Way You Lie? She thought a moment, trying to run the melody through her head. Then she realized it was only the female part that was sung. The rest had been an aggressive staccato. She nodded. I can manage. I liked the melody. Good. Follow the lyric and don't let me throw you off. Then they were on stage and he set her in front of the mic, leaving her for a moment to tell Roulette what he wanted. There was no lead-in to warn her, and only the visual on the monitor which was lost to her. She started a beat late, but caught up, finding herself quickly lost in the melody. Her voice wasn't as high as the version she had listened to, but was haunting nonetheless. Then Johnny launched into the rap, shouldering her out of the way more gently than he appeared to. He was angry. He was passionate. He was frustration incarnate. When he turned on her, she took a step back, unconsciously bowing up in the face of his aggression. It sent chills down her spine in a way she had never felt before. When he grabbed her arms, she gasped, then threw him off the way Sky had shown her and began to sing again. She poured more of herself than she knew she had into the performance. When they were done, she was exhilarated and wrung out, and too full of alien emotions. She had stood in the face of his anger, and it was real anger, if not aimed at her, and held her own, felt the surge of that tide like weathering a storm in a stone barn, able to stand back and appreciate the beauty of nature's wrath from safety. He did not touch her again when they were done, was turned away from her, staring into the back of the audience at someone. Anne felt the air beginning to seep out of her eyes slowly as her eyes caught the figure of a frosty blonde back by the front door, leaning against the frame in something scandalous, arms crossed over her ample chest and scowling. Catching the look traded between the woman and Johnny, the rest of her elation flooded from her. She took a step back, turned, and felt for the rail of the short stairs, half stumbling down them without Capine to guide her footing. She went to the bar, calling the shillelagh to her, and damned who saw. She ordered a double of poutine and slammed it back. She did not even try to pay for it. She had already been refused. She winced at the taste and left the glass on the bar, headed upstairs to the door to her cottage. Sky was at the far end of the bar and watched the whole thing. He had been impressed by the performance, but scowled when he realized Johnny had used her to send a message to someone else. There were too many people for him to see who, but it was enough that Johnny had left her on stage to fend for herself without her stick. He drank the last of his Guinness and started back towards the bathroom when Johnny staggered out of the crowded dance floor, looking for someone, he assumed, for Anne. His suspicion was confirmed as the man's eyes went to the stairs and headed in that direction. Sky placed himself in the way, blocking off the stairwell. He glared down into the elven man's eyes. "I think not," he rumbled. "I believe she's had her fill of you tonight, you numpty kitch." Johnny was a little taken aback by the insult, but Sky took more than a little pride in the confusion on his face that said he wasn't sure what he had just been called. But the man did not push the matter. Sky remained by the stairs, watching him move through the crowd, eventually hooking up with a slight young woman with short blue hair. He scowled as the two wandered out of the club arm in arm in such a way as to leave no doubt what would be happening when they got wherever they were going. He clenched his fists, cracking his knuckles in the process. A tilt of his head cracked his neck, and he turned and headed up the stairs, using the same door Anne had, but to a different location.